This week, I want to talk about the comparison between Office 365 and G Suite. What I want to talk about, rather than doing a kind of feature for feature comparison, because there are lots of those out there, and in my research for this particular video I did come across a lot of those, and I will link to them below because some of them were excellent for those of you who are looking for, you know, a very detailed kind of feature for feature comparison. A lot of them were kind of blog posts and things like that, where they had feature comparison lists or charts, and they were quite useful. Now, I personally feel that most organizations don't tend to choose G Suite or Office 365 based on, you know, one or two particular features. In some cases that might be true, but more likely it's the approach that each organization takes, that Google or Microsoft take to their productivity suites, that will sort of be the reason that has pushed someone to go one or the other. So I'm going to be talking about it really from that sort of approach point of view, and just under a couple of different topics or headings. As I said, I won't be diving into a detailed feature for feature comparison because I think that's really, that's already been done and it's kind of out there. It's more talking about the common areas that are discussed with our customers when they're deciding between Office 365 and G Suite. That's really the core of it. So let's dive into it. The first area I want to talk about is the approach. Okay, so the approach of both companies to their productivity suites and their email and communication tools is very, very different. As we know, Microsoft is coming from their own traditional software background. They're trying to build upon the success of their Office applications. They probably have one of, if not the most successful Office application in the world in terms of the number of users that they have on it. And so they're trying to build upon that success, and the Microsoft Office, Word, Excel, PowerPoint solution is really at the core of the value that they're trying to push forward. And it's quite interesting because Microsoft has packaged the Word, Excel and PowerPoint tools into a lot of their Office 365 pricing packages. So that's something that they started to do when they rolled out Office 365. And I think for Microsoft, it's been a big change for them because they're having to change how they bill customers. They're used to billing them in a very different way, traditionally, you know, 5 or 10 years ago, and now they're moving to this subscription model. So they have that traditional business in place. Google didn't, and so its approach is web only, is browser centric, and each sort of has their pros and cons. A common misconception with Google is that there isn't things like offline access, which really isn't true anymore. It might have been the case 5 or 10 years ago when the product launched, but now you can have offline access to email and calendar and documents within Google Drive simply by using Google Chrome. And so those types of limitations that used to exist are beginning to go away. And so that's kind of the approach of both organizations. One is coming from a traditional background and is kind of dealing with the drag or the lag from that traditional business, and the other is kind of coming at it greenfield, clean over the last 10 years. And that comes with its challenges as well in terms of having to build up you know, things like around security and enterprise grade controls. It's taken Google, you know, the guts of 10 years to build up those feature sets that IT admins have been familiar with. The second area I want to talk about was ease of use. And within ease of use, I think it's quite interesting because you know, often people will say the best technologies are the ones that kind of get out of the way, and that we almost don't realize we're using a piece of technology, and it's the enabler. And I think that sort of ease of use for an end user, you know, if you can kind of give the device to a child like an iPhone, and you know they'll kind of figure it out, then you know, it doesn't require very much training, and so the ease of use is kind of there. With Google, you know, really work hard to make their products very, very simple and very, very easy to use. And that's definitely a huge benefit. When you look at tools like Google Hangouts, getting into a video call in a Google Hangout, you click a link, it loads in the browser, you're in the video call. Comparing that to products like Skype or Microsoft's previous one, Link, you know, there's a lot of downloads and updates and things like that, and people will be familiar with that frustration and that lack of ease of use. Now, in fairness to Microsoft, as a comparison, there's a huge familiarity with their products, and so that's where they kind of went out, that users have been using Microsoft Outlook or Word or PowerPoint within their businesses for, you know, decades. And so although there may not necessarily be the ease of use within the product, there is a huge amount of familiarity. Now, Google does have some familiarity with its products because people use them as consumers if they use Gmail accounts. What we tend to find is people will have used Gmail and they may have used Drive or some of the other products, but not necessarily. And also the big challenge, I'm going to talk about this to kind of wrap up at the end, people don't necessarily feel that they can use Gmail for business or for work, or there's this sort of, well, I use that as my consumer email, but you know, I don't see how I would use that for business. And so that can be a challenge as well within the sort of ease of use and the familiarity piece. Next we have collaboration, and I think in this area this is really where Google jumps ahead or where it wins out, because it is built from the ground up to be a collaborative product. From Hangouts to Google Docs and Sheets and Slides, if you want to create a document or a presentation or a spreadsheet together with a group of people, whether they're in the same location or spread throughout the world, there is really no better product than Google Drive and its associating productivity tools. So I think most of you who've experienced that sort of live collaboration will understand that, and even customers who are big Microsoft heavy users that I've come across will say to me often, you know, we'll create it in Google Slides or we'll create it in Google Docs, and then we'll, you know, one person will download it at the end and sort of finish it off in Word or Excel or PowerPoint. And I think that that's quite interesting, that you've got organizations that are you know, big Microsoft users, but they're still in the back end using products like Google Drive to get their collaborative tool set, which I think is quite interesting. And I'll be talking again later on just about how Microsoft and Google are accepting that a little bit and separating out some of their products. I think it would be unfair of me not to mention Microsoft Teams when talking about innovation and collaboration within the office space. And I think this kind of comes back to the approach of the two organizations that we were talking about earlier. And Microsoft has obviously come from a very, very traditional background. They've got a huge amount of tools and apps that people already use. And that has kind of hampered them a little bit, because they can't really make massive changes to the tool set, or what's going to happen is their users are going to become frustrated or upset or angry that they've made this huge change. And so what they've kind of done, which is quite clever, they've brought out this other product called Microsoft Teams, and that appears to be, from what I've seen, their kind of innovation hub. And so they're saying, okay, this is great, you know, this is where we can make huge changes and huge innovations within the collaboration sort of space. And I've seen some of the demos of the new versions of Teams, and it does look extremely impressive. with live collaboration and some interesting video conferencing solutions and things like that. And I think it will be interesting to see where Microsoft go with that solution. And I think that's their answer to try to compete with Google in the collaboration sort of space. So I'm interested to see where Microsoft go with that and how Google respond to it as well. The next area is security, and I'm really bringing this one up because we often hear from customers this idea, this feeling that Google is not a secure product. And nowadays, you know, as I said, Google have been doing this more than 10 years in terms of the G Suite product and the Google program. It's just not true. But equally, it isn't true to say that Microsoft is not secure. I think that it's very, very close at this stage. It's, you know, Android and iPhone. It's Mercedes and BMW. You know, it's very close in terms of the comparison of the two products. I think there are certain arguments in certain areas that you could make that Google is more secure. There's other areas where someone could argue that Microsoft is more secure. In terms of the tool set, both have things like two-factor authentication, DLP capabilities, and enterprise level controls for IT admins and end users, phishing, spam filtering, things like that. The last piece I wanted to talk about before I wrap up was pricing. Google really keep the pricing simple. You know, they've got three pricing structures. They've got G Suite Basic, G Suite Business, and G Suite Enterprise, and they keep it really, really simple in terms of pricing. With Microsoft, you know, they're known for this, and I know even Microsoft resellers and partners who I've worked with in the past are frustrated by Microsoft's complex pricing because it really lets them down. And I think they could simplify their product offering and probably gain more customers because, you know, if customers could just go to the site and know, you know, these are the three prices, 3 or 4 pricing tiers, and this is what I'm getting. I just think it will make that decision much easier. Now, they have, in fairness to them, worked to simplify this over the last few years, but it's still nowhere near the simple pricing of the other SaaS software vendors that people are familiar with. Most people, when they go to a SaaS product now, they expect about 3 or 4 prices. 3 is the kind of common one. Microsoft have multiple pricing tiers, and it just makes deciding what version that you need complex. And I think one of the biggest challenges, and actually I'll link to it, the guys from priceintelligently.com did a fantastic breakdown on this, which was excellent. I won't attempt to go into the detail that they did. I just recommend watching that video if you want to compare the pricing of the two products. And it just goes into a huge amount of detail. And one of the interesting things that they were talking about was customers are often frustrated with Microsoft that they're paying, or they feel they're paying for products that they're not using. So because stuff is packaged together so much and there's so many different pricing tiers, often customers can kind of feel like they're losing out. And we'll often see that within the Google world, that people will use more of the product. If they're going Google, there's a huge push to go Google and a push to use as much of the product as they can. Whereas within the Microsoft world, sometimes people will just be buying it because they lack of change, you know, lack of a want to change. And so as a consequence, they're kind of sticking with the status quo. They're still just using it for email and calendar, and maybe they're not leveraging a lot of the other tools. And very often we'll find that customers will buy Office 365 for mail and calendar, but you'll also see them using things like Zoom or Google Hangouts or other products to fulfill what is actually you know, technically being fulfilled within Office 365, but customers feel that maybe those tools aren't fulfilling their needs, or as I said, they're paying for them but not getting the use out of them that they would like. And that kind of leads into some of my wrap up, where one thing that we've noticed with both Google and Microsoft, that I think there's an acceptance that among vendors now, that customers are buying, in many cases, the sort of best of breed. So you'll see customers using G Suite and buying Zoom instead of using Hangouts, or you'll see customers buying Office 365, and very interestingly, Google, for the very first time, broke out one of their products that you can purchase on its own called Drive Enterprise last year. And Drive Enterprise allows you to purchase Google Drive and all the sort of enterprise tools that you need, Vault and things like that, separate from all of the other tools. And that's the first time Google have done that. And I think, again, that's an acceptance that you may have an organization that likes using Outlook and the calendar solutions, but wants that collaborative technology that Google have, but they don't necessarily want to pay for the full package. And so Drive Enterprise allows organizations like that to do that. And so we've seen that within the pricing structures of both Google and Microsoft, that there's a little bit of an acceptance of, like, you can just buy the kind of email solution from Microsoft, and you can buy your Drive from Google. And I think that's so those companies don't lose out those customers, because those customers would be buying Dropbox or Box or some other collaborative solution. And so Google is saying, well, if you just want to use us for Drive, that's okay. And I think that's an interesting shift in how they're thinking about their own products and their own approach to the marketplace as well, which is good. In my kind of wrap up, it's really around just thinking about what organizations tend to choose G Suite or tend to choose Office 365. We often will have discussions with customers around change management, and generally companies that are looking to move to G Suite, there's often some other large transformational change that's happening within the organization, because it is a big change to move to G Suite. Often if you're coming from an Outlook, Excel, Word, Microsoft background, or more traditional software, it is going to be a change for your users. And so there is going to need to be that leadership within the organization that will sponsor the project and drive the change. And you can, and again, that leads back to the familiarity, you can move to the cloud from Exchange to Office 365 and not require that kind of change. Now, as a consequence, that means that the benefits that companies may leverage from Office 365 may not be as large. And it's not to say that you can't leverage transformational change from Office 365, but it is more difficult because of that ease of use piece that we were talking about. And actually because the familiarity, because people are just kind of familiar with it, it will take a lot to change people's habits and processes and workflows. And so if people are given something that's kind of similar to what they had before, they're much more likely to just stick to that same pattern. Whereas if you're bringing in G Suite, the whole marketing message internally is, this is a transformational change. And so there's going to be much more effort put into changing the workflows. We do things like business transformation labs, which any of you who watch your channel will know I've talked about before, and I'll link to that. And so we would run those as part of a deployment or migration to make sure that people are looking at these outdated processes and changing them and mapping them over to Google, and really just getting the benefit of this cloud-based transformational product that they're bringing into their business. So I think with the Microsoft world, where we sort of see companies not moving to G Suite or choosing Outlook, is very often where you have a situation that there's a very embedded process maybe around Outlook or some other Microsoft product. If I was to look at the types of companies as well, again, you hear this sort of myth within the ecosystem that G Suite is for smaller businesses and Microsoft or Office 365 is for larger companies. I don't believe that that's true at all. We have customers with thousands and thousands of employees that use Google, and Google have their own examples of massive organizations. But I think there is definitely a profile of an organization, and we would try to sort of profile companies. So if you were talking to, you know, the obvious example would be a tech business, they're more than likely going to be using G Suite. But if you take it outside of that, you've got companies that are fast-paced, that have a lot of young staff. There's a huge amount of traction Google have gotten within the education space, and so you've got people coming from colleges who've been using G Suite for education for a huge amount of their education career, and so they are familiar with that, and that's what they're looking for when they move into a business as well. But you've also got things like, just checking my notes. Also, you've got companies who are looking to be more collaborative, open to innovation, and are, as I said, are sort of looking for that transformational change. And when we find those types of organizations, and they can be in any industry, you know, I mentioned the tech industry, but you know, Google's successful in manufacturing, retail, you know, a huge amount of industries. We've got a lot of creative companies, anyone in sort of the digital space, news and media, again, big sort of success areas. But taking it out of that for a minute, if you were just to sort of look at, you know, because you could get very traditional businesses that are looking for that transformational change, and so they're looking for a rapid, innovative, collaborative product that they can deploy quickly, and, you know, maybe for a particular project that they want to increase that innovation within the organization. And those types of companies, those profile of companies, tend to be leaning towards Google, just in our experience. And again, I'm not saying for the Office 365 fans out there that it's not possible to do that with Microsoft. I think that it is, but I think that the sort of push for change needs to be bigger, because there isn't, what's the kind of word that I'm looking for? There isn't the catalyst, you know, of the G Suite tool there to kind of force the change. You know, people are being forced to make this change, so you've got to put in the training and the change management. I think there's a tendency, maybe within Office 365 deployments, from what I've seen, to lean back on the familiarity that, like, oh, we know this product, we don't need to train people, we don't need to look at the processes. I've seen some really good Office 365 partners who will make sure that companies do that change management and that transformational change, and that's great when you see that. But very often you'll see the opposite, where it's just we're just going to swap it out one for the other, and you don't, you know, people don't end up leveraging that kind of change. So that's it from me. I hope you've enjoyed this week's update. I look forward to talking to you next week. I would love, because this is often a controversial topic, G Suite and Office 365, I'd love to hear people's comments in the video below. What did you think of some of the areas that I covered? Do you think there was anything that I missed out? Anything that you disagree with? I'd love to have a discussion with you in the comments. So please do leave your thoughts below. Thanks very much.